Moving on to just kind of random cards, which probably have a place somewhere, but don't necessarily have a deck that you need to build around them or a deck that they particularly improve. You have all the Manlands from across the Roseblade, so that ETB untapped if you control basic of the type. All of them are good. I think the red, white, and black ones are probably the best, but the blue one and the green one are also pretty solid as well. Mostly they're just kind of Manlands that ETB untapped, which is a huge quality of life thing.
Not fetchable, unfortunately, like animuses.
The red one is probably the best, just because there's a lot of decks that play a lot of mountains. Burn being an example, Big Red being another one.
Yeah. Also
just the cheapest to activate at 2 mana. The white one having evasion and being grey paid is also very nice. And the black one is just very efficient in general.
Yeah, it makes tokens even if it gets blocked, so...
Yeah, and it has mana, so it's harder to block. Black is another color that you have a lot of tools in black that you don't really feel the need to play too many other colors. So it's pretty easy to get a swamp in play.
And the blue and green ones both care about drawing cards.
Yeah. The blue one is definitely a bit awkward because it doesn't have evasion. The green one also doesn't have evasion, but it's a bit bigger.
Probably just worse than Lumbering Hillock, honestly.
Yeah, probably. Area Pillar is also a really good card.
Yeah.
And blue and green are definitely the colors that you see the least monocolor decks of. So even just getting them to enter the battlefield untapped is a bit harder.
Yeah, and plus you might as well just fetch the animuses if you're going to try to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the big advantages of playing these in monocolor decks is that you probably don't want to play that many fetch lands to begin with, if any. So that kind of advantage from the animuses being fetchable doesn't exist as much. Not to say that they don't work well in 2-color decks, but definitely not best in 1-color decks.
Yeah.
Moving forward, we have Bustling Marketplace. This came up with the Elves deck. You can just ignore the bottom half of the card.
And the top half, actually. Or no, the top 1/4, I guess.
Yeah, like, those are 6 lines of the 8 on the card, but they don't actually do anything because it's the activate ability is optional. So it's basically just Reflecting Pool.
Is Reflecting Pool even in the format?
No, not to my knowledge.
Interesting. So I guess this is just Reflecting Pool then.
There's not too many 5-color lands to abuse this with, but with the Elf deck, Howling Stone and all of the creature specific lands do work with it, which is kind of neat. But besides that, not much else to say. Anointed Cursebreaker. This card is very good.
It's Leonin Relic Order with upside in 3 different ways.
Easy to cast, has relevant keywords, and lifelink has relevant creature types, cleric and soldier, and sends it back to hand. Just kind of crazy fun in general.
And it also has Oblivion rewarding, so like you can try to abuse it with Blink if you really want to.
Well, that's also very true.
Honestly, you might just run this kind of sideboard of some random decks if you want to deal with artifacts or enchantments.
Yeah, I think there's a decent chance that if you're playing like Event Horizon specifically for artifacts and enchantments, this might just be better in a lot of decks. Even if you're not, like obviously in soldiers, you probably want the soldier, but even just in a lot of decks. Also having lifelink is kind of nice.
Yeah, and it's also a creature, so like if you have creature synergies, because you can get this thing off, I guess, Theocracy.
Yep, Theocracy, Brothers Reunion as well, EHS as well.
Although EHS matters less because it also hits Event Horizon, but yeah.
That's true. Kind of similar to Zalkar, lifelink also makes it kind of nice to sideboard card. And Spurn is also kind of nice because the stuff that prevents lifelink is on enchantments.
Yeah, exactly.
Admittedly, it's not the nicest against Curse of Bleeding, but it's okay. It's always optional if you don't feel like bouncing the Curse of Bleeding to the hand. But yeah, good card. You should play in your sideboards. Another card that's kind of interesting is Asamund's Gambit. This card's not actually that high in power level, but I think it's kind of interesting because for the decks that want anthems, this is a very efficient slot where it both does the anthem and its removal. So you don't have to kind of split up and go, okay, I want an anthem and I want removal, but I have to play all these creatures. Well, this kind of does both.
Is the Foretell ever relevant?
Probably not, but maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of an interesting card. Maybe not the most exceptional one. Moving on quickly to Warbringer Titan.
It's a Titan. Like, that's all we have to say.
Yeah, if you've ever heard of Grave Titan being good, this is a Brave Titan that also has protection from instants and sorceries.
Yeah, I mean, like, how are you supposed to even deal with this thing?
I don't know.
Exactly.
I think the answer is probably just hope that your opponent playing white doesn't get to 6 mana, which is kind of hard to do in white. Amulet being another card that kind of suffers.
I mean, they're probably just going to cheat it out.
Yeah.
How does compare to Leyran Alpha?
I think...
Or other 6-drops in the format, for that matter.
I think this probably ends up being better, just because I think a lot of the decks that were playing Leyran Alpha couldn't really... The first time they're applying pressure is Leyran Alpha. And Leyran Alpha is actually kind of a fragile win condition, surprisingly. Whereas this is not a fragile win condition at all. It's just very hard to deal with in general.
Right.
But at the same time, not. But if you know how Brave Titan works, this is going to be very similar in all cases, but better.
Yeah.
So a kind of interesting card is Vantage Point. How much would you believe me if I said this was like a time warp that also drew you 4 cards?
I feel like my opponent's just going to tap and hold up counter spells.
Well, but what if they don't have counter spells?
What if my opponent's a control deck?
Then you cry, and don't play Vantage Point.
So how are you going to get to 6 mana against an aggro deck?
Well, you see, you have this cool card called Confirm Hypothesis.
I see. But that gets you to 5 mana. How do you get to 6 mana?
And, well, you also have other cool cards like Recall Forgotten Aeons.
Right.
So it has a lot of blue. I mean, blue is the ramp color. Very easy for blue to get 6 mana in this format.
Actually,
kind of easy.
What about that the tap treasures thing that we mentioned earlier?
Very good card as well. Because Vantage Point probably is the top you go.
Yeah.
So kind of using treasure to get there seems reasonable enough. But I think this card's actually kind of legit, because I think it actually does do a reasonable approximation of a Time Warp Draw 4 in some matchups, where creatures can attack you is normally not a line that you think of being good, but when it's attached to a Draw 4, I think we start getting somewhere.
Right.
And if you want to play multiple, I mean, Vantage Point, you draw 4. I mean, you have 5 draws to get another Vantage Point. But I think this card is really cool, more than anything.
Yeah.
Beyond Spelldust Sprite, another neat card. Randomly has an infinite with Mame, Benevolent Tyrant. So again, bit of a slow infinite, bit clunky.
Yeah.
Still works, but 4 mana plus 2 mana, having 2 cards that are kind of so-so without the other is a bit awkward. Maybe a bit more excitingly, Spelldust Sprite turns your shifting lands into creatures.
Right.
Which is very interesting. Maybe if you want to get a bit spicy, you can play with Field Tender.
Huh.
Though maybe that's getting a bit too far off the deep end.
Yeah.
But you see, the thing is that with Field Tender, the 1/1s it's making also turns into Spelldust Sprite.
Right.
So, wait, but hold on. But then why would you turn your shifting land into a Spelldust Sprite? Because you could just have the land, and then you get the token, and then you turn the token into...
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay, maybe I didn't think this through entirely.
Maybe it worked.
It's something you can do. Moving on, we have Rhysta's Gambit. This card has a lot of text that is good.
Oh, it exiles, so you can screw over storm decks that way.
That's very true. Exile, always nice to have, incidentally. Also very nice against Bounty of the Gardens. Don't let them cane dance right back.
Yeah, and it's also good against Bounty in a different way.
That's true. You kind of do... I'm not sure. What do you think about the Foretell? If this card just didn't have Foretell, would you be willing to play it?
I think it'd be competing with Corona's Downfall and Memento Mori. I think those two are better.
Doesn't Corona's Downfall not only hit Legends?
Oh, yeah, it only hits Legends, huh? It's a blend between Memento Mori and Corona's Downfall. And
so if it sounds playable, because Memento Mori and Corona's Downfall are both decent enough cards, it's playable without the Foretell. How much better does Foretell make it?
Means that if you have 2 spare mana lying around, you can Foretell it, and then you can 2-for-1 your opponent, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think it makes it that much better, but it gives it more options.
Yeah, more options are always nice.
You can also try to play in Foretell Tribal, because this is a really good card to Foretell for free.
Yep, that's very true. If you want to be playing Lysine in a less pirate-focused deck, this is probably one of the cards you're fetching. Additionally, I also kind of agree that the Foretell seems kind of a bit difficult to use, but at the same time, it's also just kind of neat, where obviously there's kind of the guessing game if you want to play Bustling Oration too. But
Right.
you can also get around counter spells, which is kind of cool. So talking about Bounty of the Gardens before, and well, if you can foretell this turn 2, I mean, they can't counter it, right? Because you're foretelling it.
Right.
And if you can land the foretell, then well, make them sacrifice a bounty if like the Cane Dancer died off, or sacrifice a Panya and get a hand attack. That seems pretty potent. Or even just like more mid-range decks, like decks that rely on mana dorks. If you can kind of knock their hand, knock their board as well.
Yeah.
Hit them on all axes. But again, it is competing with these other cards, Momentum Molecular's Downfall. The more expensive part of it is competing with Prying Priory. It's just a very good, powerful card advantage spell.
Yeah.
So speaking of foretell cards, we have Usurper's End.
I think that's probably one of the best cards to foretell for free.
Yeah, very good. 1 mana, destroy target creature or planeswalker. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Losing life isn't the best, but it doesn't matter too much in a lot of decks. Worst case scenario, it's just Hero's Downfall. Foretell on your turn, your opponent's upkeep, you foretell it. You cast it for your foretell cost.
Yeah.
It's planeswalkers. Good card.
Yeah.
Moving on, we have Veindrinker Cabalist. So I think the most intuitive thing is playing with Dawson. Getting kind of extra treasures is nice. Using Dawson Helix to get a treasure is also nice. Let's kind of go infinite with Dawson Helix. It has good keywords. So if you want to play like artifacts with Deathbit trophies, maybe that works. Pumping up something that Menace and Lifelink sounds pretty good.
Or like you can just attack with this thing and it'll ramp you, because maybe your opponent just doesn't block the Menace.
Yep, very true. Unfortunately, it's kind of slow because it's treasures tapped.
Well, I mean, if you just suicide attack this guy with turn 2, you still get to play a 4-drop on turn 3.
Very true. So yeah, if you want to play an Ego, Infectious Ego on turn 3, not as good as pre-nerf, but probably still pretty good.
Ego activates it because it has lifelink.
Unfortunately, only once per turn, but it's still nice interaction. Also, actually, just with Dawson, Dawson +1, paying for the discard, using the treasure, using Dawson as the 4-drop kind of engine that he kind of is. It's kind of nice too. Moving on, we'll have Crypt Tutor. This card is Demonic Tutor, doesn't have lands, but you need a legendary creature, particularly, in play.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I don't know if this is good, but it's Demonic Tutor with a condition is always going to be a card that you need to look out for.
Actually, notably, it doesn't put the card into your hand, so it's safe from hand attack.
Well, that's true. Actually, if you want to be really...
Oh yeah, Reweave Reality, right?
Yeah, if you want to be really spicy with it, you can fetch Reweave Reality. If you want to make judges mad, you can play this with foretell cards and have a whole bunch of exile cards face down.
Yeah.
The card is not foretold, but still... Maybe the novelty of having a bunch of face down cards amuses people.
You can pretend to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And like... Actually, isn't there a cycle of quote-unquote trap card foretells in the set?
I believe so, yes.
None of them are good.
They're not actually good, but if you want to do that, you definitely can.
If you want to roleplay as Yugi, you can do that.
I mean, foretell might actually be a real deck. Whisper of Fortunes, it's kind of interesting as a kind of payoff. I mean, there's a decent number of foretell cards we've talked about.
Yeah.
They're kind of good generally.
You can actually keep the opponent guessing.
Okay, moving on. Hellfire Titan. It's a Titan.
Yeah. Is it better or worse than the other Titan?
I think it probably ends up.
Oh, it doesn't let you play them for free. So
Doesn't let you play them for free. That'd make it exceptional. I think it ends up being a bit worse.
Yeah. Doesn't give you immediate impact.
With the exception that it kills a lot faster.
Does it?
Than the other Titan. Well, if you're fetching burn spells, yeah.
Right.
Whereas I think the protection on the other one is really nice, but at the same time, this does a lot of damage. Has trample. Trample is a very good keyword on big creatures. And although there's a lot of text, I think the ability ends up being draw to a lot of the time.
Right.
Which is just very powerful. So I think if your opponent can't kill it, this is going to be... Well, I think this ends up being better, but I think you're playing 6 drops. Your opponent probably has an answer.
Yeah.
So I think the white one probably ends up being better in general. If you can get up to 6 mana, so like with a Tunu or something, this is a very good payoff, I think, for your mana.
Yeah. Well, speaking of burn spells, Brimstone Oration.
Basically, it's kind of like a Void Flare, but instead of kind of ramping up to 3 damage, you can just pay more mana and have it deal 4. If you have problems with the Wanderlust, this is probably better than Void Flare. Or if you just have a bunch of excess mana, this is probably better as well. Maybe also, even if you have don't have a ton of 2-drops, you can consider this. I think there's some play to whether you play this with Void Flare or Squatch, I guess.
Yeah, and if you're in Foretell Tribal, then you definitely play this card.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a big reason why you'd be in Foretell kind of tribal. Moving forward,
Efflorescence.
So, how do you feel about spreading seas type cards that don't draw cards? Tell me, how do you feel about what's the thing that turns stuff into forest?
Son of Dryads.
Yeah, so how do you feel about Song of the Dryads?
I am play Commander competitively.
So I think this card's really neat. If you really hate bullet pools, I think this is the card for you.
Isn't Mirrorgate better at that job, though?
Then absolutely play Mirrorgate instead. Let's say if you're playing bullet pools and you really hate Mirrorgate.
But why are you playing bullet pools in the green deck?
You just cause you feel like it. You want some more elves, just cause.
Okay, sure.
Additionally, there's a lot of like 5-color decks running around that, especially if you base green, so thriving building type stuff.
Oh yeah, right.
They want extra forest, so giving them a second forest kind of messes them up.
Yeah.
Additionally, combo decks. I mean, combo like Crazy Train doesn't really want a forest. They prefer the Crazy Train. It's also reasonably fetchable. Seto-san obviously comes up here.
Oh yeah, you can turn Seto-san into non-creature hate.
Yep. But with the Night Soldier deck, this is a nice thing that you get if you go into green.
It also answers Seto-san pretty well.
And that's also dealing with Planeswalkers is nice as well. Honestly, just a very nice card.
I mean, it's basically Swords of Plowshares for non-creatures.
Path to Exile, yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
And also that you can probably also just mana screw people with this, color screw them. There's a lot of kind of sketchy mana bases in the format.
Yeah.
So moving on, we have Byron's Gambit. So this card is great because we can stop having people play Stand Unassailable. Stand Unassailable is not actually that good of a burn hate card. So Byron's Gambit, a couple upgrades over Stand Unassailable. First of all, instant speed, which is nice. So if you're working with like Mabel being the generic example, but anything where you like you're not just tapping out every turn. Still has the gain 7 life mode. Making 2 1/1s, I think comes up a fair bit. Obviously not a huge deal, but especially if you're in a deck that just wants to go wide, I think you're pretty willing to play this if you're playing like Anthems or whatnot. Whereas like beforehand, there's kind of limited options if you really want to tech against burn in more aggro decks. Additionally, if you just want to bring this in for decks that just have some reach, the kind of decks with like 8 burn spells, typical kind of aggro plan, not going to kill you from 20 with burn, but maybe it comes up having the alternate mode of 2 1/1s if you're not being threatened and be burned out is kind of nice.
Yeah. How often are you going to foretell this thing?
Probably not that often, though I think being an instant makes it a lot easier.
I mean, in a late game, I guess you probably want to foretell this thing because just gaining 7 life isn't that much value, but at least you get 2 guys with it.
Yeah, so like if you're just bringing this in for like in a flash kind of deck and you're playing against so like Big Red comes as an example, maybe you just foretell this turn 2 because you know they're not going to do anything threatening on turn 2. But definitely I think an upgrade for a lot of decks that stands unassailable. There's maybe a chance that this is main deckable if you care about life a lot. Mystery of the Dying Herds is kind of an interesting card. There's a couple other cards that care about being at more life than your starting life total. So maybe this ends up having a place there. So we have Guardian of Vraniveer as a kind of interesting ramp-esque card, where I think this card's just kind of very efficient in general.
Yeah, it's basically a Goblin Necromancer but for creatures with upside.
Yeah, admittedly creature decks aren't necessarily in love with Goblin Necromancer for creatures, but with spells costing 1 less, you're on the same color as Lone Survivor, being a ramp piece that works with Lone Survivor, which is nice. Also, if you want to do something with like Green Elemental Circle, as an example, it's kind of neat because you can go turn 1 Green Elemental Circle, turn 2 this, turn 3 5-drop, which is a nice curve, and this also has utility late game. Also, if you want to play multiple stuff in a turn, maybe you want to mess around with like L, might be something to that. Playing multiple things in a single turn, you play this on turn 2, turn 3 you go Sangjin and L. Double up on mana. Cost reduction also tends to make good use of the attack trigger.
Yeah.
If you want to get really spicy, you can go turn 1 Osk, turn 2 this attack with Osk.
Ooh.
No, this is not good, but it's something you can do.
It technically does embattle the Osk.
Very true. It does definitely do that. So just some other random cards that are like kind of interesting, but also just go straight into the deck. Probably don't have too much utility. Shay, Master Evoker.
It's a one-man prowess guy, so like, yeah.
It goes on prowess. The ability is kind of interesting, but I think you really need for the prowess to be good, for the card to be like that great. So probably just go straight in prowess.
Yeah,
No big questions.
If you have 3 mana, you can like inscribe a Scorch onto something, and then suddenly you're casting Scorch every time you attack. So like, it's not, the ability isn't that irrelevant.
Yeah, the ability is definitely important, but I think at the core you do need the prowess to be utilizing the prowess to use the card to its full effectiveness.
I think it's actually a lot like Enraptured Countess in a way, because they're both cards that let you recast Scorches on 3 mana.
Yeah, that's true. I think the main thing with Shy is that it's kind of a bit harder to work with.
Yeah.
You need a bit more setup for it, where you need to like be able to get through on the ground. And like definitely there's a lot of like definitely very similar card to Countess, but it kind of has weaknesses that Countess doesn't. Of course has upside that Countess doesn't. But
yeah.
Blood Venge Berserker. Maybe this is a good burn card.
It's a 1-mana 2/2 haster, so like you're competing with Vanished Companion, and this thing nobly doesn't hit yourself for 2 every time you attack with it.
Yeah, maybe worth looking at. Might end up being too awkward, but maybe doesn't. Well, something like Cult looks very awkward, but generally ends up working out well enough. Maybe this is similar. Secluded Courtyard.
It's a reprint from Canon.
You're happy playing with your tribal decks. You're not going to go out of your way to put in decks that aren't tribal.
Exactly.
Maybe it opens up some more 5-color tribal decks. Who knows? Tegan the Sparrowhawk. Very interesting card. Unfortunately, 1-mana aggro cards basically only go in tribal decks. In that case, the deck is Legends.
Yay.
Wildbot Aspirant, same story. Goes in tribal decks. Warriors. Counters. I guess Counters isn't really a tribal deck, but close enough. And then Griffin Country. It is a tribal deck. Tribal flying.
It's favorable, or it's the Beck and Drake card number 5 to 8.
Yeah. So if you want more of this kind of Stormcall Sentinel, this is what card for you. Fetching a fly is also kind of interesting, though, and maybe you can make use of it.
Yeah, you can, like on turn 4, you can end up turn fetch Panya, play Panya, on turn 5, Time Warp.
Yep. And maybe you can use it outside of flyers, but I think it's kind of hard, and you kind of need to go a bit every way.
Yeah.
In a way that's probably not worked well.
I think that's everything that we wanted to talk about, so yeah, a lot of interesting cards coming out.
Yeah, lots of very interesting and very powerful cards.